Right, good morning. Shabbat Shalom. Praise Abba Father for His kindness, for His love, for His mercy, and that He has brought us back again today to be able to celebrate His goodness because I'm a child of Yah. He has delivered us from darkness and set us into His glorious light and allowed us to sense something of His presence when we worship Him. And so today we're going to continue this topic of the covenants. Last week we did some introduction. Today I'm going to take this introduction a little bit further and hopefully come to a conclusion of the introduction and start with Adam and Moses. Adam, Noah, Abraham and Moses. And then next week we will conclude with the last couple of covenants. But last week I was trying to communicate and share that when we think about the covenants and when we think about Genesis 1, we have to realize that it's actually the unfolding of the greatest love story ever told. It is this incredible love story of Abba Father, Jehovah, who's pure. Who Scripture is saying Elohim is love. That is what characterizes Him. In its complete sinless environment where sin has not even entered, who's opening salvo to His children and then the rest of creation is, I would like to share with you that in the beginning love. That in the beginning love, like when you've met your spouse for the first time and you see that spark and you realize, well, this is it. This is the beginning. This is the end. It's finished and clear. This is it. It's that in the beginning love. And so that's why I think Genesis 1 opens with in the beginning. The one who speaks is love. And He gives us this in the beginning love. And then He expands on this in the beginning love. And He does so by creating the creation as we know it, or like we think we know it. And the psalmist is singing that, look, the stars are singing, the hills are rejoicing, the trees are clapping hands, the entire cosmos is singing to His glory and to His majesty and His greatness. And in that, He has appointed mankind as His stewards to take care of it. I'm reminded of a conference that I was at in America. It was 2004, and the dinner speaker, a very famous professor, came and he was to address us at this conference. And normally dinner speeches are given to very prestigious, very high-ranking individuals. And it normally needs to be very brief because, it's them and then dinner and it's a very special time and you don't want long speeches. But you want speeches that's full of impact. And so it was given to this professor whose surname happens to be Rosenzweig, who's also be a rabbi. And he picked Genesis 1:26. Now remember, this is not a religious conference, like everything other than that. And he spoke about the meaning of the words rule and subdue. And what's our responsibility? It's not to rule and subdue as you and I understand it from the English language. It's much broader than that. As to what the duties of what Abba Father has given us. And perhaps one day we can unpack that as well. And I can borrow heavily from what Professor Rosenzweig has shared that day with us. But it is this love story. And in between that and where we are now, we've got sin, who has separated us from that perfect environment of love. And even more than that, we've got the flood and everything that changed. The atmosphere of the earth changed completely. Everything changed from before the flood and after the flood, let alone from Eden to where we are now. So currently, if we listen to what the psalmist is saying, if we read what the Torah is saying about what happened at Mount Sinai when they received the covenant, that they were able to see the words and how the words actually hit the trees and split the rocks. That, wait a minute, back in Eden, before sin, how was it there back then? Because see, what sin did, and the weight of many generations, countless number of generations, the sin of countless generations upon our shoulders today, the weight of 6,000 years of sin that has separated us from that, has made that we see very partially, and we hear very partially. If you think about that sound and light, they are frequencies. And we are only able to see a very narrow strip of frequency, and we can hear only a very narrow strip of frequency. What if they haven't had that limitation? What if they could see light and see sound? What if they could see and hear the full spectrum of frequencies? And that's why the psalmist is singing about it and the praises of Abba Father, and saying that even the stars in the heaven is singing to His glory. The trees are clapping hands because color has got sound. So what you can think of is a situation, and this is bad. I mean, none of us were there, so we don't know how it was. But one possibility is that they would say lion, and you will hear and see the words lion, and with it a smell. And lion will answer, and you will hear and see and smell the answer. And all the animals and all the plants in perfect harmony. It will be like a philharmonic orchestra under the baton of a director playing a symphonic concert. The violins will know exactly what to do. The other strings will know exactly what to do. The wind instruments will know exactly what to do, when to do it. And likewise with the percussionists. But in this case, in the creation's case, without sin, that perfect love. Think about it for a moment. Under the baton of Maestro. This was not in the script, sorry. So, under the baton of Maestro Messiah, creation is making this wonderful sound, this colorful mosaic of colors, like a kaleidoscope, unto the glory of our Father. And it's sin that separated us from that. The good news is, that's where we're going back to. We're going back to that. Where you've got this full spectrum of all the frequencies that you can hear it, see it, smell it in perfect harmony, and that harmony is playing the word love and adoration unto Abba Father under the baton of Master Messiah. And in order to do that, in order to restore that process back, we needed a legal instrument, the covenants. It's the covenants that we need to take us back, to guide us back to that situation, to that state. We're not there yet. Hence, we need the covenants even more. Hence, that I also think that's why we, in a sense, lost the weight of the covenants. Why we've lost an appreciation of the covenants. It's, in a sense, ground zero of our faith. Without the covenants, what do we have? Nothing. Intellectual knowledge, perhaps. But the covenants is this legal instrument that Abba Father is using in His great wisdom, because He needed the legal instrument to take us back to the garden. Because see, we got separated from this love, from this glory, from this weight, from the kavod of Abba Father by sin. And now it has to be stitched back. And we have to learn and we have to mature and we have to grow into that. And then at some point in time it will be restored unto the glory of the Father through His Son. Hence that I think covenants have become diluted. Because if you can dilute the covenants, you can rip the core, instrument of what Abba Father has put in place out, which makes our faith effectively hollow. And then, if trouble comes, you will fall. I've signed many contracts in my life, and when you sign it, you put it in the drawer and you say, let's work together, you and your business partner, and we will forget about this contract. When will you take it out of the drawer? When there's trouble. That's when you go and take it out of the drawer, when there's trouble. When it's a happy relationship, everybody's working and smiling and you meet the deadlines and you put the products on the table and a happy client and everything, then there's no need for the agreement, for the contract. It's when there's trouble. Unless I've missed something, we are living in troubled times. That's when we need the contract. That's when you go and read the clauses and say, what is standing in this contract? Because if I know what is standing in this contract, well, that's the terms of the agreement according to which we're going to play out. And yes, the Egyptians might be behind you and the sea of water, sea of reeds in front of you, and say, but wait a minute, let's read the script. I'm on the right side of the script. Then there will be an outcome. Have to know the covenants. And what is standing in there? If you don't know the covenants, and the Egyptians are behind you and the sea of reeds before you, you'll panic. And you'll do crazy things. But if you read the script, and say, but there's legal tenure. You cannot do A, B, C, or D because the contract says X, Y, and Z. You use the covenants in times of trouble. Good times, enjoy the ride. It's bad times. And so, in a time of trouble, we need the covenants, ground zero of our faith, more, not less. And perhaps I should actually just stop here. But if we think about it for a moment, Jehovah in His great splendor existed from time eternity to time future. And then He thought it well to speak life into the world. And the scripture, as Genesis 2 verse 4 is stating, and He birthed the heavens and the earth. It's hard to imagine that because, there was just Him in existence, and then out of Himself He birthed heavens and earth, and now it's Jehovah and the heavens and the earth. The nearest description that I can get to it is with childbirth. Now, Christian was trying to explain childbirth about a month ago to his you will remember you smiling there, Christian. It was difficult because we men is not supposed to talk about childbirth. But what I can share is that our children were born at home and I was there. And so one Friday morning, 8 o'clock, it was me and the wife. And it was nice. 9 o'clock, it was me, the wife, and our son. What happened? Childbirth. Likewise, 20 months later, me and my wife, happy in the room. An hour later, me, my wife, and our daughter. That's childbirth. There you are, and suddenly there's another one. And that's how I think it was. Because that's the patterns that He has given us. It was Him in cosmos. And then He birthed heavens and earth. And voila, there it is. Don't think it was voila, but somehow it was there. In great harmony, in great splendor, with this orchestra. Let's picture this for a moment. When we have an Olympic Games or a World Cup opening ceremony, it's colors and it's light and it is sound and it is carefully choreographed by a program master. We're talking about the opening ceremony of creation. So whatever you see in terms of the Olympic Games is but a very poor imitation. When I shared this with my family about 5 years ago, my daughter immediately remarked and said, the world, had to wait. Until Thomas Edison created light. Well, not created, but he invented light. For something remotely to happen again like that. For all those years, from creation up to Thomas Edison, it was not possible. I thought she had a clever mother by immediately grasping it like that. And then obviously what happened after Thomas Edison. There's many things to say about this one. I don't want to get too much derailed, but of how light and sound and music and art has been stolen. But it's actually in the domain of Abba Father. In this beautiful symphony of love. And so He's putting this all back and taking us on this journey, and that through covenants. Starting with Genesis 1:1. And I've shown this last week, so I'll be very brief about it. If you unpack it word by word, then one possibility would be to interpret it as the head, the source of all things, because of love, is the first fruits, the best, of the strong one with the authority of a shepherd, who through Him, who is the beginning and the end, birthed everything from Himself by means of a covenantal cutting. The fruit of this birth is the heavens and the earth, They are the witnesses to the covenant, and with this blessing, He cares for the world with kindness. And He's taking us back towards this. And for that, He is using a string of covenants, which gives us the legal standing. The big word is locus standi. But if you don't have locus standi, don't bother the judge. If you've got locus standi, take your case to the court, because you've got locus standi. You've got something to stand on. You can't go forward facing the trouble if you don't have locus standi. If you don't have something to justify your standing in faith. That's the covenants. So why covenants? According to the dictionary, it's a formal, binding, legal, verbal or written agreement or compact between two or more parties, usually under the seal for the performance of some action. The objective thereof is to bring together, to join forces in action or in a business, to collaborate, to accomplish or establish integrity or oneness in structure, purpose, function, and or operation. I'll unpack this a little bit in the next couple of slides, if this is a lot of words there. I just want to briefly go on one small detour and say that many of you might have heard about something called the Salt Covenant. And I'm not touching on it much. Next week I'll touch upon it briefly. But if you look at Leviticus 2 verse 13, it says it is the salt of the covenant. The text actually says, and do not forget the salt of the covenant. Meaning, the salt indicates the longevity thereof, the permanence thereof. It's not a covenant made with salt. You add the salt to it in order to estimate the longevity thereof, the permanence thereof, the purity thereof. And likewise you might have heard about concepts like the threshold covenant. It's not a covenant made with a threshold. It's the place where you've signed the covenant, the threshold of the covenant, where it has been invoked. Many peace agreements have got like the treaty of X, Y, and Z called to the name where that specific peace treaty has been signed. And then that place where that peace treaty has been signed then becomes also the witness of that treaty being signed there. Because one of the things that you write in an agreement is, what's your domicile? Where do you live? And where has this been signed? Because that makes it concrete. And that's why the threshold, or where the contract actually has been signed, is so important, because that acts as a witness as well, in addition. So it's not a covenant made with a threshold. It's the threshold of the covenant, where it has been signed. And so the covenants that Abba Father made with humanity, and the ones that we're going to discuss, they've got thresholds. Where have they been signed? Where have they been invoked? Because that where they've been invoked, where they've been signed, is also testifying to it. It just happens to be that Jerusalem. Just happens that most of them are I think there's one that's not in Jerusalem, but the rest are all Jerusalem. Or we think it's Jerusalem, or thereabouts. Hence also that it became the battleground around covenants. It's because that's where it's been signed. So it's not just a place on a map. Well, it is. But it's also the place where the covenants have been signed, or most of them. So, if we take this idea of integrity one sentence further, because you will remember that I've said the objective of a covenant is to accomplish or establish integrity or oneness in structure, purpose, function, and or operation. So what is integrity? According to the dictionary, it comes from the Latin that means whole, to complete, the quality or state of being, complete, unimpaired, whole, undivided, anything to do with oneness and wholesomeness. When you are whole and consistent, there is only one you. So how many yous are there? You at home, you at the sports field, you in social media, you on a social platform, you at work, or is just one you? This is hard, to be just one you. You take that same you with you wherever you are, regardless of the circumstances. So for better or for worse, that line in the covenant, right? That line, for better or for worse, that's the one that you take forward with you. Only one you. And so integrity is a big thing, because I'll touch upon it in one of the subsequent slides, but the other side of integrity is then when it's broken, when you've lost integrity, is that you've lost connection with yourself, or you've lost connection with the person that you've got this contract with. Then there's a breach of integrity. And that allows the evil one to absolutely have a party. Once you've got that breach, because that's where he can step in. But when you're whole in integrity, wholesome, then there's no place for him to enter, which is one. The you on the Shabbat, the you on Monday, you at home, you on the golf course, or the tennis court, or wherever you are. This is the same you, same value system, same conduct, same ways of operation. And our Father is the epitome of integrity. He's one. He's Echad. And so sin has made that we've lost that integrity with ourselves. We've lost that integrity with our partners, in business, our spouses, in marriages. And then he can come in and he can steal and destroy. So it's the one you all the time. And in mathematics, for those who've got a bit of a mathematics background, integration is a method of adding or summing up the parts to find the whole, which is different from differentiation. You might remember integration and differentiation and the equations that goes with it. It's the same principle. Differentiation is breaking it up in parts. Integration is summing it up. Integrity is bringing it together, making it one whole. Example is a tree that is standing there. Its integrity is intact. It can provide shade, it can provide food, it can provide everything that a tree does because it's strong and standing. It can withstand pressures from outside. It can withstand the effects of the wind, the hail, the storms, the pests. But a tree that's fallen over, that's dying, has lost that integrity. And it's no longer functionally useful when the integrity is compromised. Likewise with a breach. If the breach is intact, its integrity is intact, it can function as a breach. And there's harmony and beauty and people can use the breach. But when the breach has lost that integrity, its structural integrity, it's no longer one. It's calamity, it's disaster, it's trouble, it doesn't function. You can't reach where you have to reach. Covenant is about re-establishing that integrity with our Father and with our destiny. Because we've lost that because of sin. And so the covenant will come in and say, you used to be in this beautiful love relationship with the Creator God, singing praises with complete integrity, doing what you're supposed to do, praising the Almighty, bringing glory and honor to Him. But now, you've lost that integrity. Let's put it back together. So before the fall, we had a situation of Abba Father being this structural, functional whole, and then He birthed heavens and earth in this complete uniqueness, as we've said earlier. Created integrity in being intact. But then after the fall, all shattered. Structurally and functionally separated. And now it has to be put back in order to restore that integrity. I think it's such a big word, which is often overlooked, that if you think about value systems, our Messiah has taught us, let your yes be yes and your no be no. What is he saying? He says, be a person of integrity. That's what he's saying. There must be one you, a restored you, working towards then the greater whole. And marriage is a spitting image of this. It's the formation of one entity comprising two non-identical individuals. We've spoken about that a previous time, and that is that kindness does not happen necessarily when you're in agreement. Agreement is agreement, that's nice. Kindness happens when you disagree. That's where you have to utilize or implement kindness. Comprising two non-identical individuals growing into both functional and operational unity with a purpose following a covenant. And so marriage becomes the pattern. Why is marriages under stress and under pressure? Because it's the pattern. Back to the Father. And now, my final verse before I'm actually getting to the conclusion of the introduction. And that is John 10. Yeshua therefore said to them again, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. Whoever enters through me, he shall be saved, and shall go in and shall go out and find pasture. The thief does not come except to steal and to slaughter and to destroy. I have come that they might possess life, and that they might possess it beyond measure. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. Last week we spoke about the good shepherd. We spoke about Psalm 23. Jehovah is my shepherd. I shall not lack. And our Messiah then saying, He is the shepherd. He is the door. He is bringing his flock together. He is the great integrator unto life. Bringing it back into his unity. Bringing it back under his banner. We can think about John 17. Let them be one as I am one and you are one. He is the integrator, bringing them back, bringing them together as one flock from wherever they are. The thief is the differentiator, the one that splits, steals unto death by slaughtering and destruction. So the sad thing is that unto this splitting, dividing, breaking up in parts, South Africa has got the dubious privilege of actually giving the world a term for that. I was abroad once, and I was hearing this word, and I couldn't figure out what are they talking about. It was the whole time about apartheid, and I thought it's a new word. It took me a while to realize what they were saying. We're excellent in dividing things, splitting things. Our Messiah is the integrator. Doesn't mean you have to agree, but you integrate because of love, because of what he is, of who he is. And we can do that because he's the shepherd. He's the door. He's the one that provides us with that way in order to do that. Whether it's in a marital relationship, a fellowship like this, a workplace, it doesn't matter where it is. The thief will always try to break in parts. The Messiah will always try to unite under his banner, on his terms. So, let me stop talking about the covenants and actually start to dive into them, starting with the one with Adam. Now, I was sharing with Johan just before the meeting started that I was asked about 10, 12 years ago to talk about the covenants, and I immersed myself. Where's Karen? I think she might actually have been at that meeting. Where's Karen? Can't see Karen now. There. Karen, was you at the meeting? There at Gerda and Alfred's place when I presented the thing on, she's nodding. So it was about 10, 12 years ago. And so it took me 2-3 months to prepare for it. Reading what all the Bible scholars are saying about the subject of covenants, and it's highly and utterly confusing. None of them seems to agree on anything. And so I presented it and shared it with them at that point in time, saying that it's very much work in progress. And ever since I've been working on this topic, it's still work in progress. It's probably a little bit less work in progress than 10 years ago, but it's not finished. Right off the bat, with respect to Adam, there's a controversy. And the controversy is that the word covenant does not stand in the text. So is it a covenant if the word covenant does not stand in the text? So the Bible scholars are ignoring the covenant with Adam. Others are saying, no, it's not one covenant, it's actually 2 covenants. There's one before the fall and one after the fall. I'm sitting on the fence and say it's one covenant with 2 parts. The thing is, the word covenant does not stand in the text with respect to, let's say, Genesis 2 verses 22 through to Genesis 3 verse 10, 12. It doesn't stand there. But it stands in Genesis 1:1 as the umbrella, as the covering, and everything that happens within the before fall, before Genesis 3 stands under that. And then what is happening in Genesis 3 is absolutely unique, and I'll talk about that in a second. So the part 1 is conditional. It's conditional with Eden and functionally whole. Absolutely this glorious perfection that we spoke of earlier under the baton of Maestro Messiah. Kaleidoscope of colors. To worship and walk with Jehovah in a relationship of utter integrity. Oneness. To be the creator steward of creation contains Abba's directives read the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And that's where the condition is. That's why that part is conditional. You will not eat of the tree of good and evil. And that is very interesting, and we need to ponder on it for a moment. It means that in the pre-sin environment, in this perfect wholeness, there was a house rule. There was a house rule. Do not eat of that tree. And it's actually it changes one's perspective to realize that in perfection, there was a house rule. So if there was one house rule under conditions of perfection, do we need house rules when we have non-perfection? Probably more. 100 or 600 or 6,000, yes. And if you don't know the house rules, then how are you going to conduct yourself? Now I'm running ahead because now we're talking about Moses, but I want to link this with Moses, that they're not decoupled, they're actually together. They work in harmony with one another. That's why I'm bringing it up now. That in perfectness, there was a house rule. And therefore, in this, and we have to realize that in this perfection was in this bubble of love. Think about, don't want really to think about images here, but you've got the advertisement of Aero, a little bubble, and you're there, and it's this absolute complete love, and there's a house rule. If it's there, then it must be everywhere else. Whether it's 1 or 20 house rules doesn't matter. There's a principle of a house rule and the conditions of perfection. So likewise, when there's no perfection. So you cannot say, well, I'm saved, so I don't need house rules. Doesn't make sense. Does not make sense. As a matter of fact, house rules and the giving of house rules is a sign and an act of love. I don't want to bore you with too many stories here, but going abroad, working in other countries, normally you will have a meeting a day or two where you will sit down and the counterpart will then give you a briefing in terms of the project mission and in terms of the house rules and how you should conduct yourself. It's a different country, it's a different place, it's a different milieu, and you will go through security checks and you will go through the house rules of that country. Because if you don't follow those house rules, you will make social blunders. So it's actually kindness on behalf of the counterpart to take you through those house rules of that country. There are a few funny ones that I came across, like don't greet local ladies. Like, okay, that's a funny house rule. Don't take pictures of children. Well, okay, well, funny house rules, the ones that you're not necessarily used to. But it protects you from making serious social blunders, which actually could be very devastating. So being briefed about the house rules of the environment within which you're operating is a huge act of kindness on behalf of the counterpart. So Abba Father providing us with His house rules is not draconian. It's an act of love. Operate like this in my house. Whether you understand it or not is irrelevant. This is the rules of my house. And it comes from the Garden of Eden, where there was a house rule. Do not eat of that tree. And this is a thought. If this house rule, this one about eating from that tree, has been done away with, then we may eat from that tree, and then science, rationality, intellect may be and will be our God, and we will be its slave. Serious? Do we want to live in such a world? Obviously no. So that condition is still in place. Even though it comes from before the fall, it's still in place. So that covenant is still in place. It has not been done away with because the condition is still in place. The part two, the unconditional part, is that while in exile from Eden and functionally separated from Abba Father, no longer one with Him like before the fall, then that's where the tricky bit comes in because the word covenant does not appear there specifically. But all the characteristics of a covenant does. All of them. It outlines the terms and pronounced against humanity as a result of sin. It announces Abba's provision for that sin, the Redeemer. It describes the future of the adversary, what we will do with the adversary, crush him under his feet. And it also stipulates that humanity will live through childbirth and work. So it's got all the ingredients of what the terms of this covenant is going to be. And what will happen to the different role players in this. But it does go further. It has got specific covenantal parties. Adam and Eve, and Abba Father, and through them, the rest of humanity. It has a very specific provision or purpose. Humanity as representative of Abba Father on earth as a good shepherd. As He was the good shepherd, creating everything, He is now mandating His people, His children, to be the good shepherd of his handiwork. And that's where one could consider the unpacking of Genesis 1:26 at a later stage, perhaps. And then the covenantal fulfillment is when Messiah will crush the adversary under his feet, and the millennial reign and beyond. It's multi-tiered. So there's the first advent, well, that's done. But there's a second advent, and there will be some things happening there. And then there's the end of the seventh day, or the end of the millennial reign, both of those being future events. And so that covenant is very much still active and with us. If you can say if it's been done away with, then you've done away with the Redeemer. Because then there's no place and role for the Redeemer. Because it's the Redeemer's job. We've got no job here. We are, in a sense, passive on this one. We've got the responsibility towards managing, maintaining the earth, the Genesis 1:26, the rule and subdue part, which is not rule and subdue, but that part. But in terms of this dealing with the adversary, we've got no deal in. We're observers. It's his job. And it's not done. So, when we think in terms of the troubled times, when you need to take out the covenant and say, but what's the fine print here? The fine print is saying, there's a Redeemer, and he's coming, and he's going to do this job. I would really like this covenant to be very close to me. And then the covenantal sign or seal, the Genesis 1:1 witnesses that we spoke of last week, death. It's interesting that the concept death is in Genesis 2. It's before the fall. It says, if you eat from this tree, then you will most certainly die. The idea, the concept of death was introduced before the fall, but conditional. Obviously, that condition was breached, and then death took place, and the consequences thereof. And then from dust to dust, the counterpart of death, which is then stipulated in Genesis 3:19. And there's a very interesting and I think very important component that we often neglect or forget, and that is that there was a ceremony in the garden, and Adam and Eve, they were clothed with what? Skins. So, do you go up to a goat or a cow and you ask him or her, please give me your skin? That's why if you talk about an agreement, you say you have, or a contract, are you putting skin in the game? Are you putting something tangible in the game, in this contract? For them to receive clothes in skin, something had to die. And then they were given that. They couldn't have received the clothes of skin without something dying. So and then in order to understand a little bit further what transpired there, is that we learn from the Torah under which conditions will somebody be a legitimate receiver of the skins from a sacrifice. It's the priesthood. The priesthood is entitled to the skins of the sacrifice. So what happened there, in most probability, is that it was an altar with a sacrifice, with a sacrificial offering, with the skins given to Adam and Eve, and with that, with the Messiah as high priest proceeding over this, and after that, handing them the skins and say, now you be my priests. Handing them the priesthood. And from them, the priesthood going forward. And so, at that engagement, at that event, we have to actually ask them the question, what is the purpose of a priest? It's very interesting. The word Cohen basically means to facilitate a process of drawing near to Abba Father. That's the job of a priest, to facilitate the process of worship. And when you facilitate the process of worship, bringing glory unto Abba Father, you're a priest. Doesn't matter. If that means you've sent somebody a WhatsApp message or a verse, and you facilitated worship, you were a priest unto somebody. So the whole point of facilitating worship, drawing near to Abba Father, established right there, going forward, up until the end of day. And the priesthood, obviously it then got specific characteristics later on, but it's the commencement thereof. And then the conditions, mankind to work the earth with focused effort unto Him, using whatever He has given them, and subsequent generations are to follow life through birth in this imitating what has happened in the garden, and humanity will participate through this process by the covenants that He has then established. And Abba Father will care for us with kindness and upholding the cycles of the earth, the heavens and the earth as witnesses. And as we said last week, when we think of the stars of the sky, the moon, the sun, the sands of the sea, when we look at them, we can actually encourage one another and say, the covenants are still in place. We're still okay. The covenants are still there. And then He will crush the head of the adversary. And the key word with this one is the word Redeemer. It's much easier to remember one word than 4 slides. So the key word is Redeemer. Him being the Redeemer. Noah. Noah is interesting. Also some controversies there that I will highlight. But it's an unconditional agreement or covenant. And that is that there's no more judgment by water. And then implied a future judgment of sin by fire. That judgment of sin by fire does not stand in the context of Noah. The book of 2 Peter brings that in and say, remember Noah, and then he took it further and explains of that the earth has been prepared for this. And he brings us back to that. The covenantal parties of Abba Father and Noah, and through Noah with the rest of humanity. And the provisions or the purposes in the various verses is that He will bless. He commands Noah and his sons that they should be fruitful and multiply and populate the earth. Places all plants and animals under their command. Forbids the eating of meat which still contains blood. Before Noah, the eating of meat was prohibited. No eating of meat before Noah. After Noah, braai vleis is okay, provided that it's clean. And there's no meat in, no blood in. Forbids murder. It says that violent men will be repaid by violence. My suspicion is, and that's merely a suspicion, is that verse, Genesis 9:6, is what Peter, in 2 Peter, is taking forward. Is that's where the prophecy is lying. That violent men will be repaid by violence. And we've spoken about that in the past. If you sow the wind, you will reap the whirlwind. And that sort of idea. And then the covenantal provisions, He promised never to destroy all life on the earth by a flood again. He established the rainbow as a sign of this everlasting covenant. So has it stopped? No, it's an everlasting covenant. When it rains, there's a rainbow with us. The final judgment with fire, as said in 2 Peter, and casting into the lake of fire. Both of them, future events. So it's still in place. Covenant is confirmed by a cutting and blood on an altar. Covenantal sign, the seal or the symbol thereof is the rainbow. And then the condition or the penalties is man may eat meat, which is clean, and Abba will not judge by water. All the different conditions of the covenant in there. And the key word is judgment. So, first one around Noah, Adam is Redeemer, but then just following on its back, judgment. Turning to the big one. The one with Abraham. So, I have to hurry and say that this one has got several different names in the books, in the textbooks. It's very interesting that this is the one who's got various different names. And they're quite uniform around the others, but the scholars have got hugely different terms that they use for this one, which I find perplexing and difficult to understand because, he made it with Abraham and then Isaac and then Jacob and through the rest. What's the issue here? And the issue is that the predominant name that's used in addition to, as an alternative, is that it's the covenant with Palestine. And immediately you've got a tension. A huge tension. Because it's about locus standi, it's about legitimacy. And it's about who established it with whom, and what's the outcomes. And you can actually do that by changing the name. One back. It has got two parts again, an unconditional part and a conditional part. The unconditional is that Abraham would be the father of a great nation, and the conditional part, the composition of those who would inherit the land. So that's a condition. Unconditional, Abraham, you will be the father of many nations and I will make you great. Unconditional. Conditional, how will it be constituted? Who will be in there? That's the conditional part. And the parties is Abba and Abraham carried forward to Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Ephraim, and then the rest of the nations who then sojourns with them. The unconditional components, long list of unconditional components. Abraham would be a great nation. His name would be great. He would be a blessing Abraham to be blessed and to be a blessing, father of many nations, all the families of the earth to be blessed in Abraham, blessing or curses to those who bless or curse Abraham's descendants, everlasting covenant with Isaac and his descendants, covenant descendants will possess the gates of their enemies. A long list of unconditional elements within that covenant. The conditional parties, who's going to be there? Well, that's a touchy subject, but that's the conditional part. And the covenantal fulfillment thereof is when Israel and those that sojourn with her live in the land, clearly a future event. The reason why stressing that it's clearly a future event going through them is to say they've not been done away with, because clearly it's not been fulfilled. The provisions are conditional based on a promise following obedience. A nation will be plucked off the land, Messiah will return, Israel will be restored, Israel will be converted as a nation, enemies will be judged, nation will then receive her full blessing and restore people to the land. This covenant has been confirmed by a cutting and blood on an altar. So that's what needs to happen, the procedural effects. It needs to be signed. Where has it been signed? Where is the threshold of this covenant? Somewhere in the vicinity of Jerusalem in all probability. It's just Noah where there's not, where we don't think it is. The others are probably in the vicinity of Jerusalem. Covenantal sign or seal is a circumcision of the heart, circumcision of the flesh, the sand and the stars, and the Genesis 1:1 witnesses. That's there forever. And Jeremiah 33, that we've seen last week, very much speaks to that. Man to live by faith, binding of Isaac, probably where the cutting of the threshold. Abba will be their Elohim. He's the provider who will turn his friendship with Abraham into a covenantal relationship with all nations. And obviously, Galatians 3 speaks big time into this. Galatians happens to be a difficult book from one perspective, but from the other perspective, it's a glorious book because it confirms everything. Because that's what Paul was all about, confirming everything. Unfortunately, it is the reverse that's seen. So the key word is nation and land. Last one, Moses. Condition, choose life. If you don't choose life, well, it is conditional, subject to choosing life. The covenantal parties, Moses, Aaron, his sons, 70 elders, and through them, the entire house of Israel. With the provisions is that his children will be a special possession among all people if they obey God and keep his covenants. That's why it's conditional. To make children of Israel a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, defining the house rules. Exodus 19 through to 24. The giving of a ketubah, a contract, to his bride under the chuppah on Mount Sinai. And then, final slide. The covenantal fulfillment. When will it happen? When will it come to fulfillment? Well, at the wedding ceremony, at the Sukkot, and then eventually also in the 8th day, both of which are future events. It's not been finished. It's still unfolding. Covenant is confirmed by a cutting of blood on an altar. The seal is Shabbat and the Genesis 1:1 witnesses. The condition is man to obey, follow the Torah as a trainer unto Messiah. As I've mentioned earlier, the giving of house rules is an act of love. If you know how to behave in another country, if somebody tells you, in this country we drive on the right-hand side of the road, it's an act of love. It will prevent you from making a crash or a disaster. The fact that in our country it's on the left-hand side is irrelevant. That country is on the right-hand side. Obey that rule. If you don't do that, you will end up either in hospital or in jail or in both. And so it's an act of love to know what the house rule is. And that's what he did. He gave us his house rules. And he's inviting us to this. My goodness, I mean, it's just love written all over it. And so the key word, not surprising, is house rules. House rules with love. And so we will continue with the rest next week. But let me just conclude in saying that in troubled times, we need to read the contracts. Because then we can see where we are. And even if the Egyptian army is coming, and even if the sea of reeds is in front of us, stand. Abba, Father, thank you that you have blessed us with this gift of the covenants, a legal set of instruments that enables us to stand in times of trouble. Not because of a hollowness of our faith, but because of the substance that's in you, and that you have signed it. And we praise your name for that. Thank you that we have this blessing, and that we therefore can be a blessing to others by sharing hope, love, kindness, and provide people with, a hand in times of trouble. Because you are the good shepherd, and your door is open, and you will lead everybody to green pastures. In the name of our Messiah, Yeshua, amen.